particularly with Michael, I think partly also because he was adopted, I think that he always had this sort of a really kind of ingrained sense that he had to sort of, in a way, prove his worth in some way. You know, he was adopted. His parents gave him a second chance. They gave him a great, you know, start in life. They're very lovely people, but from a very sort of normal, humblish background, I would say. And I think he always wanted to prove to them that, you know, that this thing that they'd done was worth it. You know, that it was worth taking this kid in. And so I think for him, it was he came from a very different place, and me too, really.
It's interesting because that, as a microcosm, is kind of how a lot of people feel about the Brexit debate.
Yes, you're right. Yes,
they were the institution.
Well, there was definitely a sense that there was a sort of liberal establishment which was very pro-Brussels, and because they felt because they do still feel they know best. They feel that they're sort of entitled to make all the important decisions in life because they're a liberal establishment, and therefore they're right because they've always been right because no one's ever questioned them. And then there are other people who never have a voice, and that's the thing that I do say right at the beginning of the book, which is that we were all astonished, but I think the voters were astonished, the voters who had voted Leave, because for once they'd actually got their way, because normally they don't, because they don't count, because no one ever listens to them, because they don't have the right connections, and they don't speak correctly, and they don't eat the right food, and they don't do all the stuff that they're supposed to. So it was interesting that sort of cultural. It was a cultural rebellion of kinds, really. It was interesting, anthropologically speaking, I suppose.
I think some people listening or reading your book might say, "Well, hang on, you know, you and Michael and you know, me as well are fairly middle class anyway." But we're talking about different levels, I suppose, with the Camerons.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I grew up in Italy. I went to ordinary Italian state schools till I was 14 or 15. Then I came back to the UK and I did my O levels, as they were called.
Wealthy family.
Old I am.
But you're from a very wealthy family.
No, my father had no money at all.
Why did I get that?
He made a lot of money. He worked incredibly hard, but he didn't start off with any money. My family don't have any money. You know, I mean, most of them are dead now, but they were just, you know, my grandfather was a boiler maker. You know, my great grandfather. So they're not. You know, we have to buy our furniture. You know, we don't inherit it. Do you see what I mean? There's a difference there. And although my father did very well, he, you know, when they first went to live in Italy, they had no money at all, literally nothing. And one of the reasons they went was because it was the 70s. Britain was, you know, under a very left-wing Labour government. There was no jobs, 3-day week, all that kind of stuff. And they just thought, well, you know, we might as well take a leap of faith. You know, they were very young, so they did. But it took my dad a long time before he, you know, made any cash at all. And, you know, he was in his 40s, 50s. So,
that's when you grew up, though, isn't it? Is what I mean. Like
when I grew up.
Yeah, you grew up when your dad had. I mean,
no. I mean, my parents didn't have. My mother used to make my clothes.
Oh, right.
But I mean, you know, we're not talking about sort of grinding poverty or anything. But we're just not talking about a kind of classic
Etonian.
Exactly. Yeah. We're not talking about, oh well, you know, shall we go to the country house or the London house this weekend?
I think those people's lives, I've only sort of touched around them, and I've had a reasonable life myself. Been very fortunate in many, but I can't believe the kinds of lives that they live. It's actually odd when you meet them. They are almost an entirely different species.
It's a different species, yeah. But it's also very enticing. I mean, I do talk about this in the book. You know, that world is just so beautiful, and it's so lovely, and it's a world where really money is not a problem.
Yeah,
and that's an extraordinary privilege to have, really. Yeah. Where you genuinely, I mean, you might be a bit short 1 month or whatever, but there's not a systemic issue with money. And I think in most people's lives, there is a systemic issue with money.
Well, you've always had to earn money.
Yeah, I've always had to earn money, you know.
But did the Camerons, are they from sort of a world where they didn't have to?
No, I think they always had to earn money, but there was always a sort of sense that there was a kind of there was a hinterland of money. Do you know what I mean? There was sort of, there was parents and
safety net.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think but
I don't think we should get too. I mean, I don't think that makes them bad people. I just think the thing is, what it does is it explains why they have this sort of where they glide through life. There's some people move through life quite easily, and they were those sort of people. Whereas I don't think Michael and I are those sort of people. We're kind of we're always slightly walking. I was always slightly pushing into the wind, as it were, with stuff.
I see. Yeah, I also don't mean to. I'm not sort of poo-pooing the upper classes or the upper middle. Good on them if their families have earned and all of those things. But I guess regarding, as we were discussing, sort of Brexit, I think it was that kind of elitist, versus the people.
Yeah, completely.
And that was summed
because
up
also remember the elite weren't really. They weren't really feeling. For them, the main disadvantage of Brexit was that they couldn't find a Polish builder.
Yeah.
Or the person
wait in line and they're on holiday and a passport.
Exactly. That's that. Whereas if you were, living in Romney Marshes, your problem was that, you couldn't get a job because someone else, was. So there were very different kind of backgrounds to those votes, I think.
And there's that line that I think sums it up, and it was George Osborne to Michael Gove: "If you go for leave, you will confer respectability on the mob."
Mm.